Hello, my name is Debbie Weinstein, and I'm moderating this. I'm with the Coalition on Human Needs, one of the two organizations, we in Half and 10, that are co-sponsoring this webinar, which is Stories Behind the Cuts, Practical Tips for Effective Story Banking. Let me tell you a couple of things just to repeat what Charlie just told you. Yes, you can download slides now in that icon with the papers in the upper right. You can you will receive an email afterwards, a couple of days afterwards, with both the materials, including the audio, the entire webinars to listen to later or to share with other people. The agenda, let me tell you what we're going to tell you. Why are we doing this? And I'll tell you a very short bit about that. What makes a good story and how to use the stories. And finally, how to help Half and 10 CHN Story Bank by contributing stories to it. So let me go back and introduce the speakers. That's me. And more importantly, Elizabeth Prescott is the Story Bank Coordinator at Families USA, a national organization that's done more than any other to build support for health care for all. And she's been working on story banking for a decade, used it to make the case for CHIP, State Children's Health Insurance Program, for the Affordable Care Act. Liz knows the power of people's stories in fighting for the services that people need. And after Liz, Donna Norton is the National Campaign Director for Moms Rising. Since 2006, over 1 million members. Let's say that again, 1 million members. And that's because they're smart and funny. They have T-shirts that read "Changing More Than Diapers," and because they're working on issues of critical importance to moms and families. They've built grassroots support for the health care law, expanding CHIP, expanding unemployment insurance. And finally, Melissa Boteach, who's the manager for Half and 10, the project to build the national commitment to cut poverty in half in 10 years. And that project's jointly led by the Center for American Progress Action Fund, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and the Coalition on Human Needs. All of the speakers are uniquely suited to help us collect stories and use them. So my very small part about why we're doing this, and I can't think of anything more sort of emblematic of why we're doing than this quote. I did not get caught up in the individual cuts. My vote was a marker for moving towards a greater degree in a reduction in spending. And then the speaker, who is Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, she was absolutely a big supporter of the program. What program? Head Start. She may think of herself as a big supporter, but she voted for something that would cut 218,000 children out of Head Start. So the extent to which they can, there are politicians that want to say, I want to cut the federal government in general. They don't want to say, I want to cut something specifically. Well, the polling data shows that, in general, people want to cut the federal government. But specifically, they do not favor particular ways of cutting. That's not surprising. So here you've got this two-thirds agreeing that, in general, you can make cuts in the federal government without hurting people because of waste, fraud, and abuse. But specifically, there are a number of different polls, and I selected from two with these examples. Very large numbers don't want to cut college student loans, don't want to cut K through 12 education, don't want to cut meals for the elderly. And this from the Democracy Corps poll from Greenberg, Quinlan, Rossner Research. Here are some examples of cuts that people don't want to make. And if they hear that these cuts are included in a specific proposal, it makes them less likely to support that proposal. Interestingly, and you can see for yourself which are the topics here, but that one on your right, when you specifically say major cuts in help for the poor and give examples of that, it doesn't show up in this question, but where they say biggest impact, that this was the question that had the most impact in moving people away from supporting to opposing what was described at the time as the House Republican plan. So that's very important for you to know. When we talk specifics, people don't favor those kinds of cuts in human needs programs. When we're just general, or if we just say cutting X billions of dollars, not so persuasive. Well, now we are about to hear from people who will give you all this information, but before we get there, we'd just like you to fill out these poll questions, just like you did the poll question about whether you could hear well enough. So tell us which constituency you represent, and that will help us in the presentation today. So I'll give you just a couple more seconds to answer this question, and then I'm going to give you one more. I think we've got everybody. And then there's one more question. How you want to use this information? Do you want to know more about collecting stories or how to communicate your own story? So that helps us know, again, who's on this very well-attended webinar. Okay, so I think we've given enough time for that, and now I am very pleased to turn you over to Elizabeth Prescott.
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks everyone for coming. It looks like we've got quite a diversity of groups that are on the call. I'll try to cater to all your different goals. I understand that there's some Q&A at the end, and I'll also provide my contact info if you have any follow-up questions. Just to give you a little bit of context, Families USA, as a lot of you know, is the national voice for healthcare consumers, and we certainly produce studies quantifying the impact of the Affordable Care Act and of public programs like Medicaid and CHIP. But my job as a Storybank coordinator is to really personalize those numbers and make them real in a human way. And if you're interested, we've actually been around, the Storybank has been around since the early 1990s. It started actually with a Senate effort to collect stories, and they just kind of turned over all 200 of those to us. But at the time, we really didn't have the funds and the personnel to really make use of them until about 2001, when we really prioritized that, and we had the technology to make to put the Storybank into an electronic format. And as you might imagine, the amount of stories really grew a lot more when we had relevant and high-profile issues that came up, like the fight to continue funding for CHIP and Part D. And I actually started in 2008, and since then we've doubled the amount of stories in our Storybank, and I would like to take credit for that, but I think it mostly comes from the high-profile debate on the Affordable Care Act. It was really, I think, consumers recognized that as a high-crisis situation, and it was easy for them to connect the healthcare crisis with their own situation. Since then, once upon a time, how it works is people really mostly submitted their story online, and I followed up with everyone. These days, we're looking for success stories to demonstrate the good things about the Affordable Care Act in people's lives, and now the nature of my job has really changed to be proactive about going into the community and finding stories, so I'll talk a little bit about how to do that. I won't go too much into how we use stories because I understand Donna is going to talk a little bit about pushing those out, but as many organizations do, we use them for reporter interviews, for congressional testimony, for ads, press conferences, and the like. And we're continuing to look for more proactive ways to do that. I understand that a lot of folks are actually providers. What I usually tell people about reaching out to find stories is to really meet people where they are. And in the case of low-income people, the first things that come to mind are clinics and other direct service groups and providers. And I understand a lot of you are such primary sources, so I'll talk a little bit more about sort of keeping an eye out for those really valuable stories. And some of the ways to identify a really great story is does the story demonstrate concrete consequences? And I encourage you to look at the Half and 10 website for a couple of examples on those kinds of things. There's a story about the earned income tax credit, for example, where the woman gets very specific about the things that she spent it on, and that makes it really, the more specific you can get about the impact that those services had on people's lives. And the other thing is, does the story counteract stereotypes? And, you know, it's hard for us sometimes to think like the other side, but it really helps to do that. I think we've all heard the stereotype of, oh, poor people are just in that situation because they're lazy and they're just not working hard enough. And I think stories are a really great opportunity to show examples of just that's just false. And I think, you know, for example, a really hard-working parent who is benefiting from the WIC program or the Medicaid program has the potential to sort of debunk those myths. And sort of related to that in trying to think like the other side is the story free of blame? And what I mean by that is we really need to focus squarely on the blame should be really on the system. So, for example, someone who is laid off is more compelling than someone who was fired or quit their job. That's the most straightforward example that I always use. And is the story easy to relate to? And I don't mean that, you know, you can't use more extreme examples, like and I'm going to use healthcare as an example most of the time since that's my background. But you know, someone who has MS is certainly a valid story. On the other hand, it takes a little bit less work to help someone understand what it's like to have a more common disease like asthma or even diabetes, and to make them understand what that would be like. One of the ways that you can make more extreme stories a little bit easier to relate to is to really pull out the personal background of the person and, you know, really emphasize the things that are common to everyone. And I'll talk a little more about that too. And I understand some of you are interested in sharing your own stories and maybe demonstrating how your own organization benefits from federal funding. And I want to emphasize that every story is a personal story. Even if you're talking about your own organization, I think that when you're talking about the benefits. I think we've all got that personal encounter in our head. Maybe there's a client interaction that really moved you, and talk about that, or talk about that passionate advocate or that passionate employee. There's a good example under the WIC program, the nutritional assistance category on Half in 10, of a woman who really gets specific about her employees and their personal investment and passion about the WIC program. So let me talk a little bit now about your first conversation with the consumer. And people are asking me about more specifics on, do I have a script, or do I have, specific questions that I always ask? And of course there are certain questions that are a little more common than others. But the most important thing is to get out of the way and make time to listen to the particular story of the consumer. Really, you just want to start the conversation with an explanation of how important their story is, how their effort to share their personal story is going to help other people in their situation. And then really get out of the way. Excuse me. But it is certainly true that sometimes the consumers or the beneficiaries kind of skip over key points in the story. So sometimes you do need to push for more specifics. And the way that I sort of think about that in my follow-up questions is to get specific about the causes and effects of within their story. It's a little easier to think about the causes and the beginnings of this story in the case of an uninsured or previously uninsured person. I always start with my first follow-up question in that case is always, when did you lose your health insurance and how? And then you need to try to get them to be specific about what impact that has had in their life. In the case of someone who is uninsured, what kind of sacrifices did they have to make in order to afford health care out of pocket? Did they pay for it out of pocket, or did they just avoid the doctor, and how did that affect their health? And I think the before and after of these kinds of stories is especially important. Demonstrate, when they finally qualified and found that public program, how did that help, and how did that change the circumstances of their life? And in the case of healthcare, I talked to someone who had been putting off a knee replacement for years and was in so much pain and was getting to the point where they could barely walk, and then finally they qualified for the temporary high-risk pool and could finally get that knee replacement, and it made a huge difference in their life. And in the case of these stories as well, you also want them to get very specific about what it would be like if they suddenly lost that program. And listen for additional angles. Maybe they'll come to you about the WIC program, but they also qualify for Medicaid, and maybe you want to go over that and the causes and effects of that program. And finally, of course, you want to end by thanking them and re-emphasizing how important it is for them to share their story. Okay, let me move on to, if you are going to be the one writing up the story as you submit it to Half in 10, a couple of things to keep in mind. This is just like any of the stories that we always hear. Every story has a main character. And you really want to start with the person's personal background and introduce who this is. What drives them? What do they do for a living? Are they involved in the community and their kids' PTA? Those are the kinds of things that the average person can really see themselves in. This person is just like me. And every story has a conflict, and in this case you want to set the context for their need, and again, what kinds of effects that it's had on their life. And finally, again, the before and after. Every story has a resolution, and you want to end with how the public program has impacted them in very specific ways. And what's special about these kinds of stories is they also are part of a larger story. And maybe you want to ask them, what would happen if X program were cut sometimes you have to add this for them and educate them a little bit. But I think often if you frame it in a personal way, they'll be able to kind of make that connection. And let me just end with an extra resource for you and a little story banking joke that I like. Nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart, right? So we really want people relate to other people. So I think it's really important to, even when you're fundraising, to really bring it to that personal level. And you'll find a lot of I get a lot of my ideas from a man called Andy Goodman, and you can learn a lot about how to fundraise with stories and share your organization's stories in a very specific and personal way. So here is my contact information, and I encourage you to get in touch with me if you don't get a chance to ask your question, and I'm always available as a resource to you. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you also for mentioning what I forgot to say at the very beginning, which is that we will answer as many questions as possible if you type them in the Q&A box, and some of you are starting to do that. We will read off questions after all the speakers have finished, but you just write down your questions as you hear the speaker or just after, and sorry I didn't say that at the beginning. But now we're going to go on to Donna Norton.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to follow up on Liz's great presentation and give you some ideas of ways you can help set the attention once you've got the stories of political leaders, the media, and the public to those stories. Moms Rising is an online, on-the-ground grassroots organization of more than 1 million members, and we're working to achieve economic security for all families in the U.S. And as Debbie mentioned, we started in 2006, and we have members in every state. Our core issues are paid family, even paid sick days, fair pay, open, flexible workplaces, affordable child care and affordable health care, toxic-free childhoods, and other key issues related to family economic security that arise through the political processes. Our members love to share their stories, and I'm going to tell you about some of the strategies we've used to try to make sure their voices and their stories are heard. Many of these examples, like Liz's, are from healthcare reform, because that's the campaign I've worked on most over the past year. First, just a note on collecting stories. One strategy that's really worked for us is to make the ask really easy. People are, as you know, incredibly busy, and we try to make it not intimidating for them to share their stories and not feel like it's going to take a lot of time to share their thoughts or their stories. So this page I have on my slide is an example of a story collection page that we use. So when we send out an action to, say, send a letter to Congress about an issue like budget cuts, we'll often have the action page redirect after someone takes action to a story collection page like this one. And because we find that people taking action on an issue often have personal experiences to share, we get a lot of stories from those actions. And then we make it easy for legislators, the media, and state and local advocates to find stories from people in their communities by putting their stories on an online map, which I believe Half and 10 is planning to do for this campaign as well. So there's a lot of ways to get your stories heard, and one of the most effective ways, of course, is to have people personally share their stories with legislators and staff. These are photos of Moms Rising members meeting with U.S. Senate staff in their district offices about the need for affordable health care. And that is terrific, and if you can do that, that is an amazing way to get your stories heard and paid attention to. But in-person meetings are often difficult for people who are working and taking care of kids during the day, so we also use other strategies as well. One of our strategies is to get our stories to the newsmakers, and, well, this is the biggest newsmaker, President Obama. But if you can get your stories to national newsmakers or local newsmakers, then they get wide coverage in the media. And this is a story of one of our members, Dawn Josephson from Florida, who shared her story with the president about her son, Wesley, who's in that photo, finally getting covered for a pre-existing condition because of health care reform. And of course, because Dawn was sharing her story with the president, a newsmaker, it was covered by every major media outlet, which is a great way to get media attention to your stories. In addition to traditional media coverage, you can leverage social media to create or continue the buzz about a personal story. So after Dawn spoke with the president, we asked her to write a blog about sharing her story that we posted on our Moms Rising blog and on our column on the Huffington Post. And her blog about sharing her story was super personal, and she talked about the shock of getting an invitation to share a story with the president and how she didn't have anything to wear and her normal babysitter was busy that day. And it was really compelling and personal and completely genuine. And it got a lot of great attention. And when a reporter from NPR happened to read it on our blog, they decided this was a great story, and they made a nice long radio piece on her personal experience of sharing her story with the president, which was aired by NPR all over the country on Election Day. So it's just a great example about how you can take a media coverage and with social media continue to ramp that up. So how do you get leaders to pay attention to the stories? Well, one is to create an ongoing good relationship with leaders, which I'm sure many of you have with your local, state, and federal leaders. And part of creating good relationships is thanking legislators for the good work that they do. That happens too rarely, they tell us. And, well, every mother knows the power of the prize or the sticker, and, well, it turns out that really never changes. And one of the ways we've gotten face time with key newsmakers like former Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid was to give them Moms Rising Superhero Awards for their work to pass the Affordable Care Act. And there I am flexing my muscles with our Supermom t-shirts. We've used those meetings not only to thank the legislators, but also to press for our next agenda item. So here's also an example of me presenting Senator Harkin with a collection of Moms Rising member stories about the need for paid sick days, which I presented to him with an award for his work on the Affordable Care Act. And as a follow-up, we asked him to blog about those stories from his Iowa constituents for our Moms Rising blog, which is the blog that you see. So that really raises his visibility on the issue, too. And even if you can't gain access to the big media magnets like President Obama and Pelosi, don't underestimate the power of tchotchke. Here's a photo of Moms Rising members delivering stories from our members from around the nation about the need for affordable health care to Congress. And we delivered those stories along with little plastic pacifiers to symbolize that we won't be pacified until our broken health care system is fixed. And I didn't expect this, but CNN and other news organizations showed up to film those plastic pacifiers. They're like, where's the pacifiers? These little tchotchke really work to get the attention of media to your stories. Here's another example. We just delivered stories from our members in Massachusetts about the need for fair pay with clam-shaped cookies to Senator Brown. And we sent the message, moms are wondering where's our clams. And it's really amazing the doors that open up for you when you say your constituents want to deliver their personal stories along with clam-shaped cookies to you. And similarly, this week in Washington State, we have members delivering pies to state legislators decorated by kids to send the message that there's something missing from the fancy pie charts about budget cuts, and that's our kids. And, of course, the kids are an important piece of their state's future. And slightly less popular, but also attention-getting is delivering vegetables. This is actually green beans I bought from the grocer myself, and those are my napkins that we delivered when we were trying to get unemployment insurance extensions. And we were sending the message along with member stories about how hard it is to get a job right now to signify that moms are good at sniffing out trickery like green beans hidden in napkins, so we're really skeptical when legislators say that they can afford tax cuts for the rich, but they can't afford unemployment insurance extensions for people searching for work. And, you know, these offices get a lot of stuff, but when they get stories that are attached with green beans, they take a second look. We also pitch stories to the media. Here's a screenshot of one of our members from Massachusetts whose son has a heart condition, and she was interviewed by ABC World News Tonight about why, as the parent of a child with a pre-existing condition, she supports the Affordable Care Act. So we take some time to pitch stories to reporters before potential news events like votes on legislation. We also use personal stories to activate our membership. And this is a story that we used from a Colorado member whose son has cancer to gather petition signatures on a petition to move America forward on health care reform. We used her story, and we used her own words and her photo, which I think is really important for getting people's attention and getting people to really emotionally connect with a story. We've also used stories to raise money for issues. This is an example of a story we used for a fundraiser from a California mom whose daughter has a rare form of epilepsy that makes her have seizures really often, and she stops breathing, which if you have kids, there's nothing more terrifying than a toddler who stops breathing. And she talks about how without the protections of the Affordable Care Act, she was likely to reach her lifetime limits on insurance by the age of 4. And we took her words, which are so passionate, which are a lifetime limit on insurance would limit Violet's lifetime on Earth. And I think when you take someone's words, that really emotionally resonates for people. People can really feel the emotional power of someone's own words. And this is me. The proof is in the pudding. Those are 26,000 signatures we got on that petition to keep America moving forward on health care reform. And I'm in my superhero shirt on my way up to Speaker Boehner's office to deliver those petition signatures as well as stories from our members. Then we also work with members to turn their stories into letters to the editor. Here's one that a Montana member placed in the Billings Gazette because we wanted to help shore up Senator Tester's support of the Affordable Care Act. And we also partner with organizations to use social media to get out the stories. So we wrote a blog about some Nevada members and how they were being benefited by the Affordable Care Act. And then we partnered with an organization in Nevada who put that in their e-newsletter, and then we both tweeted it out to our Twitter networks. Blog carnivals are also great ways to disseminate stories. On any given day, you can gather blogs from many different organizations in your communities and stories from families together about the devastating impact of proposed budget cuts. And then together with those organizations in your community or across the country, tweet out those blogs together. Moms Rising alone has a social media reach of 3 million, and in collaboration with other organizations, you can see how many people you can reach with those messages. We also use stories on social media to reach communities of color. This is an example of a blog from a Latina mom who's talking about covering her kids with the state's CHIP program. And we posted these blogs in both English and Spanish and worked with Latino bloggers and Latino social media networks, which are very popular to help disseminate these stories from Spanish-speaking moms. So quickly, some of the lessons learned. Sharing stories is a great way to empower and develop the leadership capacity of the person telling the stories. Dawn, for example, the woman who shared her story with the president, had never done anything political before, and she just talks about how incredibly empowering it has been for her to be profiled on the media. She had a press call with Secretary Sebelius. She has been covered by so many media networks and had such a great role in fighting for health care reform. And it's all because she just took a minute to share her story on our website. And so I've seen that with so many different members that it has been an incredible and empowering experience for them. Second, that the lines between social media and traditional media are permeable. As I've said, that social media and traditional media working together can be really powerful. Third, that advanced briefing of members is needed about what to expect when they post blogs on highly trafficked websites. We post blogs on the Huffington Post and the Daily Kos, and you get a lot of comments back from people, and story sharers need to be prepared for that and need to know they can call on you for help to respond to those comments, some of those comments are always more sane than others. Fourth, get your stories to the newsmakers. They want them. Everyone I've been talking to around Congress about cuts and different issues are dying for your stories. They really need them. So it's great this project is happening. And fifth, I'd say, keep it fun. These are really hard issues. We're dealing with terrible budget cuts and incredible need, and just learning from the healthcare reform fight. It's been a long struggle and continues to be a long struggle, and keeping it fun and engaging people in an upbeat way around difficult issues is a good way to keep them engaged over time. And that you're never too old to like a plastic toy or to want a prize. And that is the end of my comments, but I wanted to share my email so we can keep in touch, and we're always looking for people to blog about the work they're doing in their communities or to share their family stories, or if you're faith leaders, your perspective on these issues. So if you're interested in blogging for the Moms Rising blog, please just shoot me an email. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. That was terrific. And now we'll go on to our final speaker, Melissa Boteach.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our previous speakers for sharing these practical tips. I know I learned a lot just in the past few minutes. One of the reasons that Half and 10 and Coalition on Human Needs are embarking on this project is because broad-based budget cuts are meant to be impersonal. When policymakers propose multi-year caps on domestic spending or package cuts to specific services in the context of broader bills, the consequences of those cuts can get lost in the broader debate. But these cuts are very personal to the people who are losing jobs or access to critical services like housing and nutrition. And it's our job to bridge that divide by providing a dose of reality and underscoring the value of those services by putting a human face on the cuts. So, Debbie talked a little bit about what Half and 10 is. Again, we're a partnership between Center for American Progress Action Fund, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and the Coalition on Human Needs to cut U.S. poverty in half over the next 10 years. And we want to work with all of you on the call to build the political and public will to achieve this goal, and also to ensure that deficit reduction is accomplished in a fair and balanced manner, not on the backs of low-income families. The next few slides will describe opportunities to collaborate and take action by contributing to the Half and 10 and Coalition on Human Needs Story Bank. So what is the Story Bank? The Story Bank is entitled Road to Shared Prosperity, and it is a public collection of diverse voices that can attest to the value of federal programs and how these cuts would play out in terms of families, jobs, and communities. We're looking for stories from direct clients, service providers, business owners, faith and community leaders, medical professionals, etc., who can provide different perspectives on the value of programs. Ultimately, these stories will be sorted into an interactive map where people can search by state or program area and use the stories to make the case in support of human needs programs. I think Elizabeth made a strong case for stories when she quoted that no one ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. But we think the data are still important to make the case to policymakers and to contextualize stories. And so the map will pair stories with state-by-state data about unemployment, poverty, affordable housing, healthcare, and hunger to show that the problem is about more than one person's struggle, but systemic issues that federal services are successfully addressing. So when the map is ready to go, it's going to look something like this. But before we get to that point, we really need your help to populate it with stories. When we reach a critical mass, we'll be able to use the written testimonies and video clips that we collect across various topics to put the stories in this easily searchable map form so you can find a story by topic or by state. Until then, the stories will be stored on an interim site where you can search by topic, and I'll show you that site in a few moments. So the main thing, I think Elizabeth went over this pretty well, the main kinds of stories we're looking for are stories that have specific examples and put the reality of these cuts in human terms, making the connection between the reality on the ground and a specific federal program or policy. So to that end, we actually worked with Feeding America to draft some questions that can help to frame your story. There's no need to write these down. We'll be sending out the slides. But we want to emphasize that, of course, there are some differences in the way that a person who is a direct user of services might talk about it versus a service provider or a business owner. In all cases, we hope the storyteller would personalize. So some examples of the stories we've gotten in so far have been things like, I was helped by service X, or I needed service X and was put on a waiting list. Or from a service provider perspective, every day I see parents who are able to go to work because we provide quality care for their children. We're also looking for business owners who can, testify, for example, that SNAP or food stamps represents a certain percentage of my business revenue, and a cut would really hurt small grocers like me. So we're looking for a wide variety of voices and constituencies to contribute to the map. So when you go to the website, you'll see we're looking for all kinds of stories. Listed here are a few examples of the types of programs that we're looking to highlight. And these are the kinds of programs that are under fire either in this year's fiscal year 2011 budget debate or longer-term structural debates like next year we'll be having a debate over tax cuts again. So we'll be looking for stories on the EITC and child tax credit. So we're looking for both written testimonies and video submissions, but we know for a lot of people the video submission seems the most scary. So we wanted to offer a few tips and advice that we've gotten from both people who have done this before as well as some of our really wonderful stories we've collected so far on the website. These include, number one, keep it short. We find that people are much more likely to watch the videos if they're about 2 minutes, and to read a story if it's around 250 words. For the videos, clear sound is crucial. Be sure to be somewhere where there's no distractions, and to make sure that you're not backlit so that the light is on your face rather than behind it. One way for people on the call who are service providers or are part of community organizations to collect video stories is to bring this project to your local conference or monthly meeting and provide opportunities for your members to step out in a separate room for just 5 minutes to record their testimony. If you are coming to D.C. for a conference, let us know so that we can work with you. We'll have a contact information at the end, but just email info@halfand10.org and we can work with you perhaps to attend your conference. So how do you submit to the Story Bank for the Half and 10 Coalition on Human Needs Road to Shared Prosperity map? The site is right here, halfand10.org/grassroots/stories/submit. And there's a few simple steps. As Donna mentioned, we want to keep this as simple as possible. Read the legal tips and waiver form, fill in the required fields, which are very few, and then you can either provide us a YouTube link or a written story and press submit.
And again, I just want to underscore, the technology has changed a lot. So a lot of people's cell phones have cameras now. People have flip cams. Homemade videos are perfectly fine. You don't have to be a professional filmmaker or use any kind of high-tech equipment. We also welcome videos and stories that your organization has already collected, as long as you've obtained the appropriate permission from the person in the video, and as long as they fulfill the guidelines spelled out on the web page. We know many organizations have been collecting stories as an effective tactic for a long time, and so we hope to work with you to build out this resource. So some important considerations about the map. Number one, just want to underscore these things. Submitting a story does not guarantee posting. In general, use of logos or trademarks, only use those if you have license from the owner. The story must be your own work, or you have a right to grant a license to us to use it. And upon request, you must provide a signed release form for anyone appearing in your video besides yourself. And we've taken the care to provide a sample release form that you can download right off our website if you're going and interviewing a client, to make sure that you have their permission to submit it. So how will we use the stories? The first thing we want to do is provide you with some examples. So Liz was kind enough to highlight a few examples on the Half and 10 website of stories we've already gotten in, and there are some really great ones there. And so this can be a guide to you as you're looking for examples of things to submit. Until the actual map goes live, the stories will live on this site, halfand10.org/grassroots/stories. And it's a really good way to sort of figure out or just look at what other people have submitted and use it as an example or guidance. So a little bit of background on how we'll use the stories. Number one, they'll be in a public map. Again, this is not a private back-end story bank, but a common space for people to share their voice and a common resource for all of you on the phone. The stories will be able to be viewed by the public, including the media, elected officials, and other people across the country. We will not provide your contact information to the media without your permission, even if you contact us and let us know that you are interested in being contacted by the media. So know that we will respect your privacy. So I'm going to hurry along to the final few slides because I want to leave enough time for questions. We wanted just to basically let you know this is the first of 4 trainings that we're going to be putting on over the next couple of months, and these will all build upon each other and basically provide opportunities for you to learn other skills that you can use to push out your stories. So we'll be sending more follow-up information on that. Finally, to ensure you get the notification for these trainings, we'd encourage you to sign up to get more information about Half and 10 and to support a goal to cut poverty in half in 10 years. We'll be circulating these slides that include the links where you can get more information about the campaign. And here's an example of the website where you can both sign on as an individual or as an organization to support the campaign. Finally, here's our contact information, and we're really looking forward to working with all of you in order to build out this interactive story map, which I think could be a really impactful advocacy tool.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Really, we've had a tremendous amount of great information here. I think Charlie or Rachel, if you could put the survey back up, the same survey that thank you very much, that you saw before it started. Of course, we want you all to fill this out because we want to know that you're interested in working with us. I think you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't. But in addition, we need to know where you're from. That will help us a lot. And so please enter your name and information. So while this is up there and you can fill that out, let's take some of the questions. There were a lot of good ones. There were a number of questions that were on a similar theme, so I want to kind of group them together. And one was problems that people had in reaching out for stories, reluctance of people to be willing to share their story. So that is the sort of a first question, and very much related to that are a number of questions about, aren't people embarrassed by their situation and, in the experience of the questioner, don't want to share, and any ideas on how to handle that? Let me just take those two questions together. Liz or Donna, you want to jump in on either of those?
Liz, do you want to start and I'll follow up?
Liz, if you went on mute.
Aha, yes.
Oh, you're back.
Here I am. I did not catch the question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Do you want me to start?
These were questions about, because the stories that people would be telling, personal, could be embarrassing to them, embarrassed by their situation, and they don't want to share. So any ideas, suggestions on how to handle that? And related to that, just how do you reach out and find people willing to tell their stories?
Well, I think as far as the outreach stuff, as I said, kind of starting where people are at the point of service delivery. We also, a couple of years ago, produced some brochures on the Story Bank that we had a couple of free clinics put in and community health centers put in their lobbies to kind of communicate directly to the patients about the opportunity to share their stories. As far as encouraging folks to share their stories, we primarily use them for reporters, and sometimes they don't want to use the stories if the consumer doesn't want to use last names, so that gets difficult. But I think re-emphasizing the fact that we will contact them again before we use the story so they really maintain control over where the story shows up, I think that often makes them feel a little more comfortable.
Donna, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I think giving people options about the way to share their stories is important. We let people enter their stories on our website with just their first names, cities, and states if they prefer, and most people feel pretty comfortable about sharing their stories in that way. And then we also have a level of release that people can sign off if they're comfortable with us sharing their first names, last names, and email contact with policymakers and the media, which we never do unless we actually have permission from them again to do it. But we can tell those people are interested in a more public way of sharing those stories. So I think giving people both ways to share their stories, and for a lot of policymakers and just sharing stories, the first way of just first name, city, and state is adequate. Just when you're dealing with the media that you need that second level.
And on the half and 10 CHN Story Bank, we need your first and last name only for the private end. You can publicly put your initials or just your first name, so there's no obligation to have your full name made public.
And let me just emphasize this with Elizabeth again, that for everyone, at least in my experience, for every consumer that is uncomfortable sharing their story, and there are countless consumers that are actually really grateful for the opportunity to kind of turn their negative experience into a positive and have that outlet to make their voice heard.
That's very helpful. I guess one additional thing is that some of what the Half and 10 Story Bank is trying to do is get people to talk about services that have helped them, and there may be less embarrassment about that than just talking about an unmet need that a person might have. Another question is, do you edit the stories that would go to Congress, be shared to Congress? And I don't know, Liz, do you want to start with that?
Well, I do. I know that a lot of organizations try to keep it in first person, and sometimes I do if they've really submitted a particularly if the language that they use is very specific to their personality, and we sort of think that helps to fill out the personal aspect of it. But for the most part, I try to kind of summarize the conversation that I had with them, because I find that there's a lot more information that comes out after the interview that I want to include in the summary. and I also want to have the opportunity to connect it to the specific policies in a way that maybe the consumer doesn't have the expertise to do.
Well, this is Donna from Moms Rising. People often write in their stories so quickly on our online story collection page. We go through and will correct obvious errors in spelling or in big errors and that we think they might kind of be embarrassed about if they saw it later because they're just doing it so quickly.
Here's one that's interesting. One participant said, I'm paraphrasing, I've used all kinds of actions, stories, petitions, various other sort of actions with my representative, who was Eric Cantor, and this person doesn't feel that he's moved Eric Cantor all that much. How successful are these strategies generally? And if and are there other strategies that can work with a member of Congress? Melissa, you want to take that one? And I'll give everyone else a chance too.
Sure. I think that, if Representative Cantor isn't immediately moved by the constituent story, I mean, there are ways to work with the constituent to deploy it, such as writing a letter to the editor in his district paper, or using the story to mobilize other people to call the office and make a similar point. So part of it is, making sure that they know that the people in their district know their decision and there's some accountability involved, and working with a storyteller on that. And what was the second part of the question? It was, are there other strategies? Part of that will be, we're going to be going through some of those strategies in the subsequent trainings that we're doing. We're increasingly finding with some of the work that we're doing that social media is playing a much larger role than it has in the past, and so we'll be passing on some of those skills. We've been collecting some best practices from districts across the country of innovative in-district advocacy that we'll be highlighting on a webinar. So I would encourage folks to sign up for the email list, and we'll be sending out some more information about those.
I feel bad because it's 2:59 and there are a lot more questions. Let me see if there's one more that we can get to. Well, one is, can we see copies of brochures that solicit people to tell their stories? Are there brochures that we can share in the materials that get sent out?
Sure.
Yeah,
I can scan that in.
And we have one we've been using at conferences in D.C. that we've gone to that we can share. So we'll include that in the follow-up packet that will go out later this week.
Okay, there are a few other questions, or more than a few actually. We'll do our best to send out answers to those afterwards. But I do, again, very much want to thank the speakers on this who've given us so much information. The survey's up here. I hope you've all filled it out. And I think at this time, we're ready to close and hope that you will participate in some of the future webinars about the other strategies that the questioner was interested in. Again, on behalf of Half and 10 Coalition on Human Needs, thanks to the speakers and thanks to all of you for participating.
Thank you.